Good morning. My name is Walter Ederle. I'm the fleet manager with the City of Little Rock. Today we're going to be presenting a summer car care session, pointing out several things you can look for in your own cars and things to look out for as the season changes, and preventative maintenance tips, and just some general information about your car. Today we're going to be working on a 2013 Nissan Versa. And with me, I've got Tony Allen. He'll be my assistant. Tony Allen is a technician over at the truck shop, and Tony's been with the city about 4 years, and he'll help demonstrate different items on the car as we go through this process. Okay, one of the first things that we like to check on a car, you check your air filter. That's a very important part of your car. It's a paper element. They're all different sizes, different shapes. Every car has got a different location. And a different area where they're at. Normally they get checked when you get your oil changed or when you have just a trip check. It's a good idea to check it. On this particular car, first you have to lift your hood, and then you have what's called an air box, and there are little clips that hold the air box in place, and you click those and then you open it up, and then you can visually look at it. You can take a flashlight and see if it's clean or not. That's a very small one. That looks very clean, like it's been changed recently. What that does is it takes your air from your ram air that comes from the atmosphere, and it goes through some tubing, and then it enters that area and it filters any particles out of the air before it goes inside the motor, which could be detrimental to the motor. Think about a person if you had a cold or something, you couldn't breathe real good, you're not real efficient. Same thing on a car, if it's clogged up. This is a little demonstration of one. Of a dirty filter, and the air gets blocked and it can't flow through there right, and you lose gas mileage. The car doesn't run quite as good. So it's real important. It's not very expensive to change. They're very inexpensive and a real important part to change routinely. But they're very important to help the overall engine be very efficient. Another filter that's on most modern cars is something called a cabin air filter. Other people call it an AC or heating filter. This is a paper element. It's very similar to an air filter, but it's more of an accordion-shaped filter. This is a demonstration of one that's been in a car for a while, and it's got a lot of pollen and different particles in it. What this does is it's inside the car. Normally it's inside the car underneath the dashboard by the blower motor. And what it does, it filters the air from the outside as it enters inside the cabin area. Again, if you have any kind of allergies, or if you want to keep your car dust-free inside, it's a wonderful thing. They started putting them in cars probably 10, 15 years ago, and they do several things. Not only keep your inside of your car clean, the blower motor, which is behind it, it keeps the blower motor blades good and clean so they don't get dust on them and debris where they can jam up. So this is cars, they're all over the place as far as how you change them. If you want to look in your owner's manual, it'll tell you where it is on your car. On some cars, it's an easy thing to check. You can check them in just a few minutes. Other cars, it takes a little bit more involved, and you may need a technician to help you with that. Again, usually on a trip check or a routine check or annual check, these are usually a technician would check this part for you. About once a year is normally what people change them on. When we have a bad pollen season, some people change them more often than that, especially if you have allergies. But another thing you can do is you can go on YouTube and put the year and make of your model of your car. And it shows you very quickly a little video on where it is on your particular car, because they do vary, and how to change it and where you can buy them. You can buy them at any parts store, Walmart, any of the stores carry them. So if you do it yourself and you want to attempt to do it, you can, because they tend to charge quite a bit at a lot of repair facilities to change these out, and sometimes they're really simple to do, and it can save you a little bit of money by changing it yourself. Also, as you got your hood up here, if you notice on this, there's some vents here. Right here is where the air is pulled inside the car, and that goes inside by the blower motor, and the air goes through this. On this particular car, you'll see some leaves and some stuff that could block the vent. So as you when you do open your hood and just start checking things, take your hand and take the leaves out of there so it doesn't block this ductwork here, because that could stop up your blower motor. So the next area we're going to move on to is the oil, and we're going to talk about the oil that's inside the motor. Oil, related kind of like this is the blood of the engine. It's real important to have the proper viscosity, which is the thickness, to have the proper level, and it to be clean and changed on a regular basis. The first thing you always want to know is what type of oil goes in your motor, and that varies again according to all the manufacturer's recommendation. You can find it in several areas. When you lift your hood up, sometimes it's on a label on the car. Sometimes it's on the actual cap where you put the oil in. It's a oil filler cap, and it's got a picture of an oil can on there, and sometimes it'll tell you the viscosity of the oil. And the other area where you'd find it, if it's not in any of those two areas, in your glove box, you have an owner's manual. In that owner's manual, it tells you all the information you need to know about the type of oil that goes in your car. And if it's conventional, which is basically like regular oil, or synthetic, which is more of a modern oil that is used quite frequently to extend your intervals of mileage. And the other thing that it'll also tell you in your owner's manual is how much time your oil is good for before it needs to be changed. Most modern cars can go a little bit longer. 5,000 miles is a good average, or 6 months. Is typically what a lot of manufacturers recommend, but always go back to your manual to confirm what the owner's manual says in there. Some cars have devices electronically that it monitors your oil, and it tells you when it gets to the point where it needs to be changed. But a good overall number is 6 months or 5,000 miles. What you always want to do is when you get your gas is check your oil level. If you get gas twice a week, it's probably not necessary twice a week, but at least every 2 weeks or so, I would check my oil level. And Tony's going to check the oil level. There's a stick after you lift the hood up. It's got a yellow handle normally, and you pull it out. But before you check it, two things you have to do. The engine's got to be off. The car's got to be in a level area. Can't be on an incline. And it has to have sat for just a couple of minutes so all the oil drains back down to the oil pan. So you get a rag, you pull it out, you wipe off the stick, and then you put it back in, and make sure when you push it back in that it gets seated all the way. It's not just a little bit up, and you pull it back out. And what you're doing here is you're looking at a couple things. You're looking at the color. This particular one is kind of a dark brown or black. That means it's dirty. It definitely needs changing. In fact, this car's in here for a PM. And if it's a clear color, that means it's normally still pretty good shape. So you're looking at that, and then you're also looking at the level. There's an H and an L, high, and then an L for low. And in between, it's like a crosshatch, which is basically like little lines that make a crosshatch, and in between those two lines is usually good. I like to keep it either in the middle between high and low, or a little bit on the high side versus on the low side. Usually between those two, low and high, it's either between a quart and a quart and a half. Keep in mind that a lot of engines today don't hold as much oil as they used to. So 3.5, this engine probably holds about 3.5 quarts, where back older cars, big V8s, used to hold 5 to 7 quarts. So keep in mind, if you are a quart low, that could be 30% low on oil, which is quite a bit. But changing your oil frequently and making sure the level is good is a surefire way of making your engine last a real long time. The oils today are very well made. They're a lot thinner and have a lot more chemicals in them that help keep the engine clean and make it more efficient. If you were to need any oil, there's that oil cap that's on there. You unscrew the oil cap, and then you have to get some sort of a funnel. The funnels are available at an auto parts store. Worst case scenario, you can you get a paper funnel. Sometimes they have those if there's nothing else available, and you can make yourself a funnel. This is a sample of a bottle of oil. It's a 5W30. That is what they call the viscosity. That means how thick the oil is, and that's very critical on today's engine. So be sure. This says SAE 5W30, and this is SAE 5W30. So make sure you have the right viscosity, and you just crack it open and you let it pour in, and then you recheck it on your stick. So. Okay, continuing on with some of our under hood checks. I would do this. I would check these fluids at least once a month, or if you're going to go on a trip, or if you've been on a trip and you've traveled a great distance, you want to check all these fluids. The first one I would check is your windshield washer fluid. That is that's in a container that has a cap on it, and it has like a picture of a windshield and a picture of like maybe water squirting out. And you want to lift the lid, and you can visually see it. It's clear, so you can see a minimum and maximum. They hold different amounts. Some hold a gallon, some hold 2 gallons. But you can see it. It's clear, so you'll be able to tell the level. Now, the fluid that you put in there, you can buy at the auto parts store. You don't want to put straight water in there for 2 reasons. If in a colder climate, the water will freeze, and it'll crack your container. And the other reason is water doesn't contain chemicals that help dissolve some of the grime that you get on the windshield. It just doesn't clean as well. In a pinch, you can use water, but I would not recommend that routinely. And you want to get, when you do put your fluid that belongs in there, you want to get it for your climate. They have different minus degrees, and if you're up north and you're in very cold climate, you want to get a low temperature rating windshield washer fluid. And normally the ones that they sell at the local parts store in your area would be designed for your climate. So, but very important. It's usually blue in color. They call it blue water or windshield washer fluid. Some places have where you drop a tablet in there and then you put water on top of it, and the tablet contains chemicals and it fizzes up, and it makes a nice windshield washer fluid. Some of the auto parts stores have that available. And then you can use straight water with that little tablet. The next fluid you want to check on a routine basis is your radiator fluid, or they call it coolant level or antifreeze level. That is that's what's inside the engine's radiator. What that does is it circulates through a water pump and pumps around all the engine and keeps everything cool. It transfers the heat from the engine to the radiator, and then the wind from driving down the road, and there's also a fan, cool out water or antifreeze. There's two areas that you check. Really, one, you only really want to check the container. It's a plastic container, and keep in mind you always have to check this when the engine's cold. Never open this when it's hot, because it's under a lot of pressure and it can spew hot water and it can burn you very severely. So don't check this after you just got off the road. Must let the engine cool for at least 30 minutes or even longer. But you unscrew the lid, and you either look inside it from the top or the side. Again, there's a minimum and a maximum level, and you want to get about in the middle between those 2 levels. And you buy your antifreeze at the parts store. There are different types of antifreeze. There are different colors. They have green, orange, red. All cars take different types of antifreeze. It may tell you on the cap. If it doesn't tell you on the cap, then you go back to your owner's manual, and it'll tell you the proper type fluid for your system. If you notice on this car, next to it this is the actual radiator cap. You really never want to undo that, because that's under severe pressure. The overflow container really takes in the fluid by suction when it gets low, so you really never have to take off the cap, and I wouldn't recommend taking off the radiator cap, just looking in your overflow container. They call it overflow or coolant container. If that's good, then you can assume that your radiator will have enough fluid in it. A couple other fluids that you can check routinely. Back by the firewall, there's a brake master cylinder, and there's brake fluid. That's the like hydraulic fluid or brake fluid that when you step on the brakes, it pushes that fluid to the wheels and makes the brake pads rub against the rotors. Again, the tank that it's in, it's clear. and it says minimum and maximum on there. And as the brakes wear, they require more fluid, so it will drop down, even though it doesn't mean it's leaking, because as your brakes wear, it requires more fluid in the chamber, so that fluid does drop down. Again, you take the cap off and you pour brake fluid in there. Again, it's a very specific type of fluid. It'll tell you DOT3, DOT4. You want to look in your owner's manual, or on this cap it says use DOT brake fluid only, and it's from a sealed container. Brake fluid absorbs moisture, and if somebody had it on their shelf with the bottle open, it attracts water, and then you put it in your car, and then you have your water in your system, which is very bad. So even the top of the cap warns you not to use it from an old bottle. Use a fresh bottle. And again, if it doesn't tell you on the cap, consult your owner's manual, because the fluids are not compatible, different types of fluid. You have to use very specific fluid. And make sure when you're done that you put the cap on good and tight so nothing spills out. Brake fluid, if you drip it on your paint, it almost causes the paint to come off immediately. It's real caustic stuff. So as you fill it and then take it off, be sure to keep a rag under it and not let it hit your paint. If it hits your paint, be sure to wipe it off immediately. And never put any other type of fluid in here than brake fluid that's designed for it. Over the years, I've seen people put engine oil in the brake area because they thought that's where you put engine oil. And in about 2 days, the car pretty much locks up, and it gets towed to a garage, because it causes all the seals to swell, and it like applies all the brakes, so the car won't even move. It's a terrible thing to happen, and usually it's a $3,000 to $4,000 repair. You have to replace everything that's in the brake system. Very bad, and I've seen it happen several times. So bottom line is just make sure you put the right fluid in the right area. Other fluids that are not checkable on this car because it's permanently sealed are the transmission fluid. Transmission fluid on this particular car is designed to last a lifetime, and it's sealed. If there was a problem, a technician would have to address that with the fluid, and it's not anything that you need to check on a routine basis. This car also doesn't have power steering fluid, which a lot of cars do. It's got an electric power steering pump, so it's not driven by fluid, it's driven by electricity. So it doesn't have anything to check for the power steering fluid. If you were to check on your car for power steering fluid, the engine has to be running, has to be on, and it's a little tank like similar to these tanks, and it has a little stick attached to the cap, and it'll tell you minimum and maximum, and it'll tell you the type of fluid that belongs in that reservoir. So, okay, the next area we're going to move to is towards the front of the motor. Now keep in mind that the front of the motor on this car, because it's a front wheel drive, is on the side of the car. It's not really the front of the motor because it's transverse mounted. On the front of the motor you have an external belt. It's called a serpentine belt. It's a wide, flat belt with a bunch of grooves in it that turn when your motor turns, and it drives your air conditioner compressor, your alternator, and on some cars your power steering pump, and your water pump on some cars. A serpentine belt looks like this, where it's long, it's one belt, it drives everything. You only have one of these on a car with a serpentine style belt, but it's very thick. It's got a lot of grooves, it's got a lot of traction, it does the job real well, and it lasts a real long time. They're more expensive, and they take a little bit more skill to put them on when they need to be replaced. Replacement time frames are anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 miles. And again, you look in your owner's manual to see exactly when they recommend it. But these last a lot longer than the old belts did. The old belts are called V belts. They were like this. They're a lot thinner. And you usually had 2 or 3 of them versus you only have 1 of these. And these belts used to go out after 20, 25,000 miles. They weren't quite as tough as the new style belts. So you don't have to address this quite as often as you used to. If you had an older car and you still had these belts, you want to probably take a look at them a little bit more closely. But this style belt is pretty bulletproof, and I don't see much failure with those belts at all. But if you look at it and you did see cracking, splitting, if it's bent back and it's got hairline cracks, that means it'll be ready to be replaced. So the other belt that's on some motors is called a timing belt. It's a rubber belt and it's inside the motor. You cannot see it from the outside of the car. What that does, it's got teeth on it, and it turns your camshaft from your crankshaft. It connects the two parts. The reason they put those timing belts in there, because it made the motor quieter. They used to use chains. Chains were never had to be replaced on most cars, but a belt has to be replaced at a certain interval. Those intervals can be anywhere from 90 to 120,000 miles. Again, a lot of the 4-cylinders had it, Hondas and Nissans had them, and it's a very important maintenance item. Consult your owner's manual on when it needs to be replaced. If that belt were to break, 1, the motor would stop running. 2, you could have possible engine damage. The valves could hit the pistons. It's a very catastrophic failure when it does break. So very important to always check when your car has that kind of mileage on there that your timing belt was replaced. Also, you can check in your owner's manual if the car even has one. Some cars have gone back to chains because manufacturers don't like that. It's an expensive repair, and they want to have their cars maintenance free for a long period of time, and they'll sacrifice the noise, so they've gone back to chains. So chains are actually making a comeback. So just check with your owner's manual to see which type of system you have in your own car. Okay, the next area that we're gonna look at is the battery area on a car. Very important. Batteries have become very critical. There's a lot of electrical demand on modern cars. There's lots of little modules and computers that power up. Everything is technology based and needs electricity. The batteries are much more important than they used to be, and voltages, they have to be very steady and consistent, and in order to have that consistency, you have to have a very good battery in good shape. To find the battery, it's usually under the hood. Sometimes it's in the trunk, sometimes it's underneath the seat in the car on different types of vehicles, on vans and stuff. But your owner's manual will tell you where your battery is. You always want to get your battery checked at least during an annual inspection, or you're going on a trip, or when you get a service. Those are times usually when batteries are checked. What you do when you look at a battery, you come up to it, and there's a stamp on the battery. It tells you when it was put in the car. It tells you the month and the year. Batteries generally in this day and age last 2 to 3 years. They don't last 5, 6, 7 years like they used to because of all the demands on them. So you want to keep that in mind as you look at the date code on your battery. The other thing you want to look at, there's a negative, a black terminal, and a red terminal. You want to look at the terminal ends where the wires go into the battery, and you want to make sure there's no corrosion. Corrosion is like rust stuff that grows on there due to the acidity of the battery. And you want to be sure that they're clean. There's no debris on there, and there's no any kind of particles on there that could prevent the battery from conducting electricity. The other thing about a battery, back in the day, they used to fill with water, and nowadays all batteries are sealed. They're self-sealed. There's no battery caps on there. They're permanently sealed, so you don't have to check the water level in a battery. There may be a few out there that still check the water, but very few. Most of the batteries today don't even have an indicator to tell you when it's bad. So the best bet is when you bring it to a service station, or when you bring it to the dealer to get it serviced, or even when you go to an auto parts store, they can check your battery. And there's a device to check the battery. It's called a battery tester. And they've gotten very sophisticated, these testers, where it can measure very accurately the voltage and the amperage, and it also can tell you that depending upon the temperature, the climate that you're in, that your battery will go out in the next 3 to 6 months. And so they've gotten to be kind of like a smartphone. It's like a smart battery checker, and they're very accurate. So if you were to have it checked and they tell you need a battery in 6 months, it's looking like it's going to fail, it's best to go on and change it. Because if it fails on you, it can make your motor stop running. Not only will it not start, it can make check engine lights come on. it can create a lot of problems. So it's better to be preventative wise and get it changed if it's recommended that it's going to go out in the next 6 months, because it's very, very critical that they be full of the correct voltage. If there's corrosion on your batteries, any kind of debris on your battery, you can clean that. You can clean it yourself, or you can have a shop clean it. If you do clean it, you can go to the auto parts store, and there's battery terminal cleaners. It's a spray. It's an aerosol spray. You spray it, and then it kind of fizzes up, and then you can either use a wire brush, or you can or just let it sit there and it does it by itself. And then what you usually do is it tells you to rinse it off with water. And if you do that by yourself, wear gloves and protective something on your clothing, because the battery acid is corrosive. It can eat through your clothing. And also you want to wear eye protection, because if you brush it and it splatters in your eye, you don't want to get any of that in your eye. But those are some things you can do to check your battery. You can jump start a car, but be sure before you jump start it that you check your owner's manual. Some automobiles don't recommend jump starting, because you can damage your with all the electricity going into it at once. It can spike and damage some of your computers in there, and cause a problem with your computers. And you don't really want to go there, because they can get very expensive to replace. So consult your owner's manual before you jump start your car, and make sure it's recommended if you have in a situation where you had to have it jump started. One other thing I want to point out on a battery is there's usually a sticker on the side of a battery, and that is what they call the date of manufacturer. And this particular battery, it says 11/17. It's usually on the side. It's a round sticker. Sometimes when you get a new battery and the holes aren't punched out at the top, at least that'll help you have some idea when the battery was built. And not necessarily when it was installed, but when it was built, and that can help you determine the age of the battery. And one other thing I want to point out, when you do go up to a battery, you want to make sure it's tight and it's locked in place. It doesn't move around. And the other thing is you want to be sure it's the right group size and the right amperage, which is batteries come in different sizes and amperage, and you want to make sure that whoever put the battery in your car when you got it, put the correct battery in there. And again, that would be in your owner's manual. It would tell you the exact group size of the battery, and if the battery is, say, smaller than it should be, that may hurt your electronics of your car, so you want to replace it with the correct size.